Good afternoon, everybody. I think we had just about have everyone here, so I'm going to wait another minute or so.
Okay, I just sent him a text.
Okay, let's see. It looks like we're still missing maybe two people. No, one person, I think.
Mary Ackerley's computer died when she was getting into the Zoom, so she's waiting for it to turn back on.
Okay, great. Thanks for letting me know.
Seth just replied, sorry, my Zoom is acting odd. I should be on momentarily.
Okay, great, great. Oh, there he is. Let me make him a co-host.
Hi, Seth.
Hey, Linda. How are you?
Fine. How are you? It's good to see you.
Great to see you.
Hi, Seth.
Beautiful background. Hey, Karen. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. We were just getting started, so I'll just say a couple quick things, and we will make sure that you and I are in sync about how the tech can work, and then we'll turn things over to you pretty quickly. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay, good, good. Well, welcome back, everybody. We hope you had a little bit of time to process from the session yesterday with Karen Proctor, and hopefully that felt like a valuable, meaningful session to you. We will tie some things together with that in our session tomorrow. Today, we are beginning our what's going to be typical on most of our Wednesday sessions, where we will have an initial example situation, an example effort to share with you, typically via one of our guests who has generously offered their time to be with you, as an example of what's possible for children, families, and communities. And this very first example is a really powerful one, as you know from what you hopefully read about the Rural Opportunity Institute in the reading that we gave you for today. But we're really delighted to have with us one of the co-founders, Seth Sogling. I'm not sure your last. And we're going to spend the first portion of our session today with him. After that, we'll have some time to talk with you in your project teams, and we'll talk about how we've assigned those and give you some things to think about with regard to your narratives project, so you can begin to get started on that as well, right? So that's our plan for today. I think maybe I will turn things quickly to Dr. Mays in case she would like to say a few introductory remarks. She knows Seth better than I do, I think. I know of him by reputation. So this is my chance to get to know him as well. Linda, would you like to add anything? Or I think you're muted.
Thank you for joining, Seth. And I would just say to everyone in the class, you're about to have something very exciting presented to you by Seth and his colleague Ishi, who really, when I first met them and heard what they were going to do, I thought, oh my, what a project. And now I continue to learn from them every day by what they've been able to do and achieve in North Carolina. So I don't want to take any more time from you, Seth. We're just grateful for you being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So it's yours. The format, the floor, the virtual floor is yours.
Great. Is my screen sharing coming through?
It was, yep.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. And thanks so much, Linda and Karen, for allowing me the opportunity to spend the afternoon. Really excited to be here. I'm going to share a little bit about our systems mapping process that has been going on for a few years now in rural Eastern North Carolina. Excited to share about what that process is and how that's helped us hopefully start to shift the narrative around families and children in our community. So for today, just gonna share a little brief background on ROI's story and some research on trauma and ACEs, and then really want to share some of the highlights of the mapping process, some of the insights that have come out of it. And throughout, we'll have a couple different like interactive places to share and build together. But before jumping into any content, I was really eager to just know who else was on the call, and from the students' perspective, wanted to hear about like what are your hopes and dreams after you graduate, and what like challenges and opportunities are you most passionate about contributing to. So if anyone is brave enough to come off mute, would love to kind of get to know you and those things.
Yes, I'll start. My name's Avery, and I guess I kind of was thinking about doing corporate psychology because I like to know how like people work together in a business atmosphere, but who knows?
Really neat. Thanks so much for sharing.
It's Ben, obviously, as it says on my screen. I am a French major, but I'm on the pre-nursing track, and hope to get some sort of graduate level degree in nursing at some point. And I think my passion is like, what draws me to that is just my desire to provide direct care for people in the healthcare setting.
Really neat. So much for
My name's Yasu. What I want to do, or my hopes and dreams after college, are kind of similar to Avery's. I want to study efficiency and whatnot. Look at efficiency of a corporate or company by understanding people. Yeah.
really neat.
Thanks.
Hi, Seth. My name's Hannah. My hopes and dreams after college, I think, are to become a teacher. I really also want to go to grad school at some point for developmental psychology. And some opportunities that I'm passionate about contributing to are just working with children in rural areas. I think it's really interesting and a really big thing that needs to be worked on. There's a lot of area for improvement. So,
Really cool. Thank you for sharing in the path you're on.
My name is Patricia, and I would like to go to grad school after graduating, and in the future I want to work either in research or therapy with people with eating disorders.
Really powerful. Thanks for sharing.
Sorry. My name's Mary, and after graduation, I want to go to grad school for mental health counseling, but I'm also really interested in like environmental psychology and just how the environment like plays a role in everybody's life, because I think it's really interesting.
Thank you for sharing. Definitely got to save our environment.
I'm Lamsey, and I think after college, I want to go to grad school either for psychology or nutrition and dietetics, and then use that to go into prison reform advocacy of some sort.
Much needed. Thank you so much for sharing.
Hello, my name is Ava, and I want to become an advocate for survivors of intimate partner violence. And then I think as I do that, I want to educate the community about healthy relationships.
Really powerful. Thank you. Really appreciate everyone sharing. I think it'll hopefully have a lot of different connections between day-to-day passions and interests and future plans. I'm on the left, and this is Vici, my co-founder, on the right. And Vici first met Dr. Mays at Yale. And Vici and I met when we were high school teachers in rural North Carolina. And I was a special education teacher. And what Dr. Yu shared about the focus of the class around identifying narratives and how they impact children, I think that was one of the biggest lessons I learned from teaching special education, because my students were just brilliant. They were brilliant kids with brilliant gifts, but often those gifts didn't align to the really narrow way we do school and the narrow way that we define success. And so often the narrative around my special ed students was being not worthy, not talented, really kind of deeply hurtful narratives for them and for people around them. So yeah, I think I first just saw the power of when we can change narratives about ourselves and about other people and how much that can influence and impact. And it was really like through teaching in rural North Carolina that made us passionate about like living and working here, and it's kind of led to the work you'll see about today. And just really kind of admire the focus of this course around narratives and like what is possible if we expand narratives and create stories. And as you'll kind of see with systems mapping is just a fancy word for storytelling. And the stories that we individually tell and the stories that we tell on a community do impact like outcomes. And so systems mapping seeks to like get at the root of those mental models and start to change some of those stories. And so kind of background for Vici and I, have been really lucky to get to live and work in the Bay Area, in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. And we're rooted here where these stars are on the right in rural Eastern North Carolina, right in the heart of the Black Belt in North Carolina, a network of counties that are rural, majority African American. And Edgecombe County is about an hour east of our state capital of Raleigh. So people have heard of Asheville, craft beer capital, and then Raleigh, our state capital. And we're here over to the east. And one of the most powerful narratives about our community in Edgecombe is it's home to Princeville, which was actually the first town founded by freed Black slaves after the Civil War. Just like a deep history of resilience and fighting against different forms of discrimination and oppression. And so that's like a narrative that we often like to lift up. Also, Edgecombe County was the first place that Dr. Martin Luther King ever gave the I Have a Dream speech. He actually tested it out in Edgecombe before he took it to the March on Washington. And because it went so well, he used it in Washington. Actually still, after work, we'll go play basketball at the gymnasium where he first gave that speech. And so to work to make this a little more interactive, want to give people a chance to do a quick little brainstorming. Would love to know, I'm going to click this Google Jamboard link and share it in the chat. And it's just a virtual whiteboard, and want people to ideate and share as many things as they can think of around what words do you associate with rural and like rural South and the Southern US. And for those of you that haven't used Jamboard before, you click this little sticky note icon over on the left of the screen, and it pulls up a sticky note, and then you can write ideas down. And every time you hit save, it saves a new sticky note to the board. And then when you want to be done, you hit cancel, and then you can kind of move around your different stickies. So we'll just kind of compare at the start and the end of the presentation. Let me see if I can share this Jamboard link. Let me know if that works for people to click in the chat. And then we'll just take 90 seconds or 2 minutes, and you just want to jot down as many ideas as possible of what words come to mind when you think of the South, rural, the Southern US.
Seth, I'm getting view-only access.
Awesome, thank you. Let me see if I can change it. Great catch. So I think if you hit refresh, it should let you edit now. Take about 15 more seconds to put any last thoughts up. Great, so we'll come back to these at the end of the presentation, but can kind of see patterns emerging of different forms of racism, educational and health challenges or resource maybe shortages connected with poverty, themes around like conservatism and like tradition, and then focus on food insecurity and food deserts. So yeah, really appreciate that little brainstorm, that word dump, and then we'll come back at the end. So yeah, systems mapping is really at its root, it's a storytelling process. The process of having people share their stories and get them down on paper and draw them visually and identify feedback loops and patterns and see what are the patterns in our community that have created the reality we see now, and which of those patterns could we work to start to change. And systems mapping is best used when we're dealing with a cloud type problem. So the analogy of kind of a clock, we have clock problems and we have cloud problems. A clock problem would be when your car needs a new engine in it. It might be a very complex problem, but it's very specific and predictable. Like if you know how to install an engine in one car, you can install an engine in many other cars like that. There's like a specific series of steps to follow, and if you do that, you'll get a predictable outcome. A cloud type problem is much more amorphous. It's always moving, it's always changing. Just when you feel like you have a handle on it or you like understand what's going on, it might reorient and change shape again. And so problems that are like disorderly and not predictable, like childhood trauma, are ripe opportunities to do a systems mapping process with. And kind of the idea behind systems thinking is to identify root causes. Often we jump right to action, but that action is hitting kind of the visible symptoms we can see on the surface and not getting to the root of things. So big focus of systems thinking is to identify what are unintended consequences that might happen with whatever actions we take. And then how do we find like the leverage points in a system? Like where are the small areas where if we focus here, we might be able to have an outsized impact. And kind of a quick story on unintended consequences. In India, during the time of British colonization, the British government officials didn't like that there were all these snakes and cobras in the streets and in the community. And so they wanted to get rid of the snakes. And so they offered a bounty. And they said, anyone who brings the government official a dead snake will get 10 shillings. And at the start, it started to work really well. People started killing snakes and bringing them and getting a bounty. And there were way less snakes on the street. And the British government officials were pretty happy. And then over time, they started to realize that more and more, like this huge rate of dead snakes started to appear. And they were paying out all this money, and they didn't know where all the snakes were coming from. And they found out that people were actually breeding snakes and then killing them to like make money. And so the government officials got upset and they said, we're going to cancel the whole program. And then the people who had been breeding the snakes said, well, you promised we'd get paid for dead snakes. So they released the snakes onto the street. And by the end, there was 5 times as many snakes as when the program had started. And so it's called the Cobra effect. But very often, like we can have these unintended consequences when we're trying to do social change or do nonprofit work. And so systems mapping is helping us to identify like what could go wrong and how can we avoid that on the front end. And yeah, the last kind of big idea on systems mapping is there's just these series of feedback loops. Like every loop is a story, and every story has like an underlying pattern or structure. So there's virtuous loops, stories where things continue to get better and better and better. So for me, I love playing basketball. You can follow these loops by just pointing your finger to any one of the factors or circles and then following if it goes up or down. So the more time I spend practicing free throws, the more my skill level goes up. The more my skill level goes up, the more I enjoy playing. The more I enjoy playing, the more time I spend practicing. It's this virtuous cycle. Things just keep getting better and better. There's also a vicious cycle, just the opposite, where things get worse and worse. So connected to kind of the brainstorm you did, when poverty is higher, literacy rate is lower. When literacy rate is lower, unemployment is higher. When unemployment is higher, poverty can be higher. And that can be this vicious cycle that is hard to break. And then the final one is just there's stories that are balancing. It's not improving and it's not getting worse. It's just keeping things as they are. So a lot of supply and demand stories work like this, where things kind of find an equilibrium or find a balance. But the big idea is like any story you're experiencing or someone in the community is experiencing often falls into one of these areas. And then the mapping process is to put all these stories together. And really it's like the structure of our thinking determines how you solve problems. So often we're like talking about the content of a problem, but we're not focused on like how are we framing this. And kind of traditional thinking on the left, we think in a very linear way. We say A and B happened and led to C and led to D. And systems thinking is much more about finding the relationship and finding like how the different events are interconnected and finding the patterns. And like root causes in systems thinking are underlying forces that feed particular feedback loops. Whereas in traditional thinking, root causes are like singular events. Like because of this one event, bad things happened. So just the kind of segueing into like giving a preview of like where we are working currently. We are here in this green circle in Eastern North Carolina, right in the heart of it. And this is kind of a map of median household income. And darker red means lower income. And if you compare this map of current day median household income, you can also see that it's a similar map for heart disease hospitalization, almost identical, income and health. And this map is actually almost a direct overlay of the percent of enslaved population in 1860. And so for us in our work, like the history of slavery and like racism deeply informs kind of the present inequities that we see. And so that's really like what Rural Opportunity Institute, or ROI, is focused on. So we work with our local schools, our local public institutions, health department, law enforcement, churches, and we work with community members to like learn about historical trauma and implement new practices and new policies for like kids and families in our community. And we've done a ton of training and workshops, and we bring together like a cross sector of all these different local organizations who are all focused on how can we better support kids and adults who have experienced trauma and adversity. And our work is governed by a community board. So a narrative that's really common in nonprofit work is that people, especially with like privilege, or honestly who like look like me, like a white man, might be working in a community much like the one I'm in that's majority African American. And the narrative there is like one of disconnection and like not being connected or following the lead of the community. And so Vici and I are doing our best, and I'm sure we're failing left and right, but doing our best to build a different narrative. So we actually have a community board that meets once a month, and they make decisions about where trainings happen and how resources are spent. And they direct Vici and I about like what we should be working on and who we should be recruiting. And it's a really small attempt to like shift a power balance and shift the narrative around like who controls resources in our community. So just really grateful to these different local leaders, from schools to teen parent mentors to people in the sheriff's office who like we're accountable to. And then we have a group of people across these different agencies who are certified resilience trainers. So these are pastors, social workers, teachers, and they are now experts in resiliency and trauma and how the body works. And they do trainings all over our region and our community. So just a brief kind of how this process unfolded. Back in the spring of 2017, there was a workshop in Tarboro where different community leaders identified a specific neighborhood and challenge that they wanted to better understand. And so they picked a specific neighborhood in our community, and they wanted to know about parents who were isolated and might have their own mental health challenges. And so that was kind of our guiding star when we started doing this interview process. And so we did interviews for 3 months with about 30 sets of parents and kids, and also different providers, principals, teachers, police officers. And what came out of these interviews with both families and providers were a whole bunch of different stories of trauma. So people told stories of abuse and neglect, and all these different things that led to real challenge for people. And that was really like what rooted our work on adverse childhood experiences and on trauma. And so our community kind of created this narrative and vision of, we want to prevent trauma from happening. We want to prevent the root cause of many of the social and health challenges we see today. And so we want to prevent adverse childhood experiences. And so I might actually just skip ahead a little bit to finish out the systems mapping work, and then I'll come back to the science of trauma. But for the systems mapping work, we went from these interviews to this question of like, how could we create a system in rural communities that supports people's healing from adversity by understanding place and history and like creating new practices. And so the framing question was like, what is causing the current levels of trauma, and what forces are actually like also providing healing? And so we did like a 6-month process with a bunch of different organizations. 300 people locally participated. They did interviews, they did workshops, and we do these different community meetings every 8 weeks. And people get together in these meetings and they really dig in to this activity of like upstream and downstream. And so they would name like, what's a current challenge we're seeing? And then they would name, what are all the things upstream of that create that reality to be true? And because that reality is true, what are all the things downstream of that? And people would make these charts in these meetings. And then these charts that people made literally became the stories and became the feedback loops that made up our systems map. So like the things people said became the loops. And then it was just this really dense process of putting all the loops together. That's colleague Vici. And each one of these pages is an individual story. And the goal is to figure out like, how does this system fit together? And so putting all these different stories together eventually got us to a place where we had like a cohesive map. And then when we had the map, there was still a lot more feedback, getting people's input, seeing what was missing. And that led to like this final version of a map. And the core story of the map really is this idea that like, when we have high levels of trauma, people have less safe environments or less stable relationships. And when they have less safe environments or less stable relationships, they have higher unmet physical needs. Higher unmet needs leads to like lower capacity, and lower capacity in and of itself leads to more trauma. So like our community's ability to respond to challenges. So this is kind of the core vicious cycle that people identified of like unaddressed trauma ends up leading to more unaddressed trauma. And so the mission of the community is like, how do we break that cycle? And the big idea was that like we punish people left and right. So when a kid is struggling in school, when they're acting out, often they're acting out because they have like stress in their body and in their environment that they don't have the resources to manage. And they turn to like a coping behavior, like aggression or acting out, and they're not consciously choosing that. But we respond to that by like kicking them out of school or suspending them. As a result, we like take kids out of the very environments that would like be healing. Like they're not in school, they're not on sports teams. And so there's this vicious cycle where people are struggling and we like punish and isolate them. So kind of the core mission and story that came out was like, let's stop punishing people and let's build more opportunities for skill building and restoration. And so, yeah, the last piece of like the systems mapping process was digging into this map and saying like, where are the high leverage areas? Like where in our community is there already energy for change? Where are there bright spots? Where are there likely like ripple effects across the community? And then where's like our system frozen? Like no matter how hard we push here, we're likely not going to change that anytime soon. And so people really dug into the map. They spent like a full day on this leverage workshop, people from all these different agencies, and really dug into these questions. And what came out were these like 3 main areas that people wanted to focus on. And so people wanted to like increase learning, healing, and connection. And the big idea was just like, we gotta educate and share what is trauma and how can we respond differently. And then how can we support people healing and not punishing them? Like how can we help them build new habits and practices? And the long-term idea is that like the student becomes the teacher. So the people who have directly been impacted by trauma end up getting to be the ones who provide healing for those who are currently struggling. And so in our community, that slide you saw at the start with all those headshots, those are people that have been trained and supported to now like provide healing to others. So yeah, would love to answer any questions about the systems mapping process, and then have a little more information about trauma specifically, but would love to open it up to any and all questions.
That's one really basic question that might be helpful for the students is, how do you get the process started with a group of community members sitting around the table? How do you start them and putting out their stories?
Yeah, great question. The 2 things for us were having a champion. So there was a woman at the local school district who she herself had a lot of trusted relationships, and she called the initial meeting. And so there's a room of 10 or 12 people that all really trusted each other and trusted this woman named Erin. And because it was almost like Erin vouched for us, like Erin set the table, Erin invited us to the table, and that created like this space or safety. And then the more basic part is often I think we have such a reaction bias. Like if you tell me something, I have to do something with it. And one of the biggest things in this process is you're really just listening. Like when people tell you about really hard forms of oppression or like really bad things happening, you affirm and like support what they're saying. But people often after doing this process would say like, this is one of the first times I've ever felt listened to. This is one of the first times I've ever felt heard. And so it's like giving people the space where there is no right or wrong answer, and like whatever you say is like honored here and important.
Thank you.
I have a question about the systems mapping. Do you think that it's particularly useful for rural populations, or do you think that like in an urban environment, it would also be equally as beneficial?
That's a great question. I think it has value kind of in any setting because it really challenges you to break out of this normal way of thinking of like linear event-based thinking. But I think the asset of rural is that you can, because of the smaller scale, we've been able to get people in the room that we never would be able to get in the room in an urban environment. Like in our rural community, we could have the sheriff, the school superintendent, the head of the health department, and the head of the pastor association all in the same room having a meaningful conversation where they're debating each other and arguing. When I lived in Oakland, I think I could have spent my entire life in Oakland, and I don't know if I ever could have gotten those 4 people in a room because the scale is just like so much bigger and there's so many more factions of politics and unions. And I think there's like assets of doing it in rural that don't exist in urban.
I was pretty surprised that the police are involved in this effort, just because they sort of embody the traditional punitive measures of solving problems in a community. So I was just curious what their involvement or contribution sort of looks like.
Yeah, really appreciate that question. So giving you kind of the words that like the sheriff and other law enforcement officers that work with us have said is like, they describe it as like a case by case basis. So I think there's a cohort of maybe 5 or 10 or 15 law enforcement sheriffs and deputies who are really involved with the work, and they're involved with it because they find meaning in it and they are passionate about the mission of trauma. But they talk openly about, in a department of 200 people, they talk about like, there's the people like us who are really about this mission of being less punitive. There's people in the middle who don't really care as much. And then there's a few toxic bad apples, and they're pretty transparent of like, and to not paint an accurate picture for you all, like, it's not like we have the whole agency singing Kumbaya. It's really, there's like these specific people who find meaning in it. And then our sheriff is just amazing. Like, he's a huge asset. He's a younger, in terms of how sheriffs go, I mean, he's in his early to mid 40s, which is very young for sheriffs in North Carolina, and especially rural North Carolina. And he's a younger man, African American, and he's really leads from this place of like, we got to be less punitive and we have to stop discriminating against people for having a criminal record. So his leadership kind of creates the space for the other law enforcement officers to get involved.
What would you say is the sort of greatest challenge that was? Would you say it's a person to person challenge, or is it more of a challenge that the whole community gives you?
Yeah, really appreciate that question. I think the answer would change based on which day you ask me, but the thing that comes to mind is honestly like the belief that a better way is possible. Like, and I have no judgment or knocks on any of the wonderful people in our community and that I work with. And I think if you work in a school system or law enforcement or healthcare in a rural place, but anywhere, and you've done that job for 20, 30, 40 years, and you've seen, you know, big cuts in public funding, and you've seen like, you've kind of been hardened by the system. I think sometimes like the biggest challenge is getting people over their own kind of pessimism that like, well, why should we even try? It's not going to be different. It's not going to be better. And I think it's like a tension. I think like on our best days, we're like really pulling people towards one side of the tension of like, it's safe and it's okay and there is a better way possible. And on our worst or darkest days, we're swinging back and people are saying, this might not work. This might fail. Like other initiatives have failed. And I think it's just like not trying to convince people otherwise, but just honoring when they say that and when they feel that, and just kind of like continuing to hold that and then keep going forward.
Thank you.
So Seth, after you've gotten a lot of input, you've created the systems map, how often do you go back with your community colleagues and check it out? Is it still working? Is this what we want?
Yeah, great question. We just went pretty deep this summer with some college student interns. So soft plug, if anyone is interested in internships, please email me. We work with some public health students who they actually worked with community members virtually over Zoom during this time of COVID to like go back and revisit, is the map still accurate? And largely like still is, especially around punishment. Like we haven't made large scale changes locally around being less punitive. We have some like small pilots that are going well. But I think there's a lot of work to like shift at like an organizational level.
Like, why does it feel that we are naturally inclined to be punitive? Like, I feel like growing up in school, it was just, like very common for people to just be pulled out of school or not allowed to come back because of something that they were doing, whereas like what you were saying earlier, maybe finding help for them rather than exiling them. I just want to know why that is so normal rather than doing a healing response.
Yeah, really appreciate that question. I would say please keep asking that question in any space you're in, because you asking it pushes us to reflect that it's not normal and that we should move away from how dominant that behavior is. But I don't think there's like one right answer on it. I think part of it is we have like a control paradigm, and like you're judged if you're a teacher. When a kid is struggling in the classroom, our lens isn't what's wrong, like what happened to that child, why are they stressed, what's wrong. It's like not only is the kid bad, but the teacher's bad because the teacher can't control them. And we want to get rid of the bad teachers who can't control the kids, and we want to bring in the good teachers who can. It's like a really broken narrative that is causing a lot of harm, but has been there, I think, for like many decades and generations. And so the core of the trauma work is around shifting from saying what's wrong. When you see someone who's struggling or you're struggling, shifting away from saying what's wrong to like what happened to you. And if you take that different frame, like the teacher, it's not a problem that the teacher can't control this child. The child has like an abnormal level of stress in their body, and they're doing the best they can to cope with that stress. And we got to teach them different tools. I think it's connected to a lot of like Dr. Mays's work at her Center for Child Studies of, just like honestly building new narratives that there is no deficit in a child, and the child is just adapted to their environment the best they can. And when a kid is highly reactive or hyper or aggressive, that's often because something is being like modeled for them in their environment, or they can't cope with what is going on, not because they're actively choosing to do something wrong. I think choice theory is really harmful. Like we believe it's like you're making bad choices, make better choices. The kid isn't choosing. Like when I was teaching special ed, I had a 17-year-old student, male, amazing kid. He really struggled in math, and one day he was doing really well in math. And I went up to him and I patted him on the shoulder. I was like, "You're doing great. Like keep it up." And he flipped. He went from 0 to 60. He flipped the desk. He was cursing me out. He wanted to fight. Like we were able to like calm him down and get him outside the classroom. Now in like to your question, in the school setting, there's like consequences for that kind of aggression. But what the mom told me later that day was that he had an uncle when he was 1 year old that was really physically abusive to him. And so he had no conscious memory of that at age 17. But when I touched his body knew and his body remembered. And when I touched his shoulder to say like, "Nice job," his body said, "That is not safe. Like a male is touching you and it's not safe. And you need to do whatever you can to get safe." And the body acts much quicker than the mind. And the body said, "I'm going to get aggressive." And he wasn't consciously choosing to like blow up at me. It was like his body's best attempt to maintain safety and control. And I think the more we start to spread the science and understand what's actually going on in our bodies and in our brains, the more we can like let go of that need to control and that need to punish.
That's just to say that may be the best description of an example of adaptation to a previous environment that now is not adaptive in the current time that I've ever heard. That's really well done.
And there's no deficit in that student. He's doing the best he can. There's nothing wrong with him. We need to teach him new coping behaviors.
Right.
I just wanted to say, sorry, Dr. Mays.
No, go ahead, Ben.
This is something I'm shamelessly nerdy about, is sort of the development of those motor pathways, whether it's in childhood or wherever it is in your life, and then how those can, sort of interfere with with social situations like that. And that, it's a very real and even like biological thing.
Completely. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing. Like you're saying, it's wired in the body. It's not like a conscious thought.
It's also interesting to reflect on the fact that in our culture, especially in this country, we have such an emphasis on individualism and the power of the individual and the right and responsibility to make our own choices, that the stories we tell are often of that form, right? And so it's very easy to put the blame on an individual for the situation they're in or for what they've done, and not to think about all those other factors.
For sure, that's really well said. One of the things our local training teaches, and Ben, you might be able to do this better than me from the developmental psychology background, but they give this like hand-brain model of how our brain works. And we have like back in the back of our necks is the oldest part of our brain. And we share this with all reptiles and other animals. And it does all the things to keep us safe. It manages our blood pressure, our breathing. And it's called like the emotional part of our brain. Up in our forehead, we have our prefrontal cortex, and it's what makes us uniquely human. It's how we plan into the future. It's how we reflect on the past. Everything we're asked to do in a job or in school is out of our prefrontal cortex. And the way our body works is like when we're able to access our thinking brain, our brain is online and everything's good. But when there's a threat in our environment, we flip our lid and we're not operating from our thinking brain anymore. We're operating from our ancient animal emotional brain, and we're doing anything we can to get safe. And so like you said, Dr. Yu, like the choice story is correct if we are in thinking brain, but too often we're not in a thinking brain and someone's not making a conscious choice. And then, yeah, had a little bit of like hopeful info to share here, kind of as a conclusion of, you saw the systems mapping, and then what has all that mapping led to? So let's see. Are these slides still successfully showing up? Are those coming through?
Yes, they are.
Thanks so much. So because of that three-part strategy and because of the kind of community organizing or grassroots of building the systems map, there's been a lot of interest from a lot of different sectors. So you can kind of see schools have been the biggest, but there's mental health, early childhood, nonprofit, health, social service, juvenile justice, faith, higher ed. And there's been over 120 workshops and trainings locally that have hit over 4,500 people to kind of have this initial conversation of, this is how our brain and body works, and this is how stress impacts us, and this is what we can do to start to get our brain back online or get our bodies back online, and kind of hopefully start to dispel some of the individualism narrative or the choice theory narrative. And these are kind of two local people on the board: Byron mentors teen parents on the left, and Matt Johnson is a detective with the sheriff's department. And so you can kind of read their quotes here, but this is kind of new narratives they're able to put on their own work because of being exposed to like information of trauma and resilience. And then kind of one of the pilot programs has gotten really good results. Just grabbing the device real quick. It's called biofeedback in your phone or computer. It sounds really fancy, but it's really basic. You just clip it onto your ear. It's currently used by Alabama football, NFL, Olympics, NASA, military to build a stronger nervous system. And it's kind of just like a really advanced form of meditation to help process stress and help your body like release energy that's stored in there. But when you plug into this biofeedback device, you can literally see the state of your nervous system. So when you're in a tense or stressed or frustrated state, it looks like that. And when you're in a state of calm or gratitude or appreciation, it looks very smooth. And so it gives you real-time feedback on what is going on in your body. And then you just do breathing exercises. It's very basic. This is one of them. But you follow along and you take a big breath in and big breath out. And the like training protocol is literally just to do this for 10 minutes per session twice a day. And if you do that for 6 weeks, it will actually like change the state of your nervous system. And so we did a pilot with middle school students who were frequently suspended. And instead of getting suspended, they got to go to a homeroom to start the day every day. And they would do this breathing program. And they saw a 57% decrease in anxiety symptoms. Less referrals went down, time in class went up, grades went up. And like 100% of kids said their ability to calm down has like improved since doing this biofeedback program. And then our sheriff's office actually redecorated their old lineup room. So they put up these like nature posters. There's a little like pink salt lamp. There's a fountain. And twice a day, 10 people who are currently detained in the jail will get to come in and do this biofeedback program. And it was the first jail in the country to use this technology. And they also had really good results. So just a couple like local bright spots. And then where we're headed next year in 2021, we're calling it like the ROI Accelerator, but we're going to work locally with a cohort of public agencies to do this process, to identify how trauma is showing up in their work and to help them shift away from being punitive to more healing or restorative practices. And we really hope this can be like a model for rural and for the rural South of how to make this shift in these specific public agencies. And then we want to like scale and share these insights. And so kind of similar, just like thinking about some of these bright spots or thinking about like some of the work that we talked about today, just wanted to give people a chance to, if there's any like new narrative, new mind about rural from anything you heard today. So I'll post a link in Jamboard. Let's see if it. Okay, great. So feel free to take 15 seconds and put any final thoughts on the virtual whiteboard. And so one of the like big closing ideas here is just when we flip between these two boards, like the words that came up at the start when we thought of rural, and like the words we're associating with rural after hearing like some new narratives or new stories, is just like I hope that everyone can take away the power you have individually to shape narratives and highlight stories that already exist in your own work or in your own life that can like help change a new narrative. I would say that like there's truth on both of these boards. Like there's realities that we can find that provide truth in both of them. And it's about like creating the space for the assets that are already there to come through. And I don't think that like, I don't think that our work with ROI has like created all these new things that weren't there before. I think it has given a space and a container and a platform for the assets and the people that have already been here to like be recognized for their strengths. And I think that metaphor can be true in our own lives and our own work. And I just really deeply admire like the passions you all shared about, from futures and careers in mental health work and community work and intimate domestic violent relationship work, and just all the diversity in this group on this call. I want you to take away that like you have immense power to shape narratives, and don't be shy. There's really soft, subtle ways you can challenge when you hear narratives that are harmful. Like one of the easiest is just to say to people, when someone tells you a story or narrative you don't agree with or feel good about, like take a breath, try to ground for a second and say like, why do you think that? And give them a chance to explain it. Another one is to say like, hey, I disagree with your narrative. It doesn't have to be like a combative, but it could be like, hey, I think the narrative you're telling could be harmful, and I think there's a better one that is out there if you want to talk about that more. But just don't sacrifice. The world can be a really intense and hard place, and like don't sacrifice some of the power we all have as individuals to like shape narratives wherever we are at. Happy to answer any closing questions.
Did you know that this is what you wanted to do graduating college?
Not at all. It's been a emerging, constantly emerging and iterating path. Leaving college, I knew I wanted to like work in education and wanted there to be less racism and inequity, which is pretty broad terms, but still feel that same passion. But the way that has shown up, I think at every step is just like being open to different opportunities as they come. And even this work, the systems mapping, like the community here identified ACEs and trauma, and that's why we are focused on it. And if they would have identified a different issue, I'm confident I would have like gotten as invested or passionate about it. So
Seth, it seems like it probably took, I don't know if it felt this way to you, but it seems like it probably took a lot of courage to embark on this effort. And I'm wondering, A, did it feel that way to you? And then B, sort of how, I don't know if you could say anything about what led you to go forward, right? Because as Dr. May said earlier, when she first heard about this, what you and Vichy were thinking just sounded like such a huge piece to take on.
yeah, for sure. I think the dots make a lot more sense looking back than when you're in it. So I appreciate the like affirmation of courage, and I don't think I necessarily felt that in the beginning moments or in the starting. But what you said made me think. Vichy actually is all about this book called The Drunkard's Walk, and it's by a mathematician. And the whole premise is that like it's called like coin flipping. Like be open to trying new things and flipping coins. And when you flip a coin, you can't control if it's going to land heads or tails, but you can control if you flip it or not. And so in life, we're way too focused on like, should I flip it? Should I not flip it? And often the answer is just like flip away. And instead of viewing that you have one flip to make, it's like try to flip it 10 times. Might not have made that much sense, but the idea is like have the courage to like mess up, fail. It's never going to go as well as you think it will. And like view every opportunity as a coin flip, and you're going to learn from it, and you're going to learn what you liked and what you didn't like. And then you're going to like make a more informed coin flip next time. So I think like this work has definitely made me more confident or courageous in like being willing to flip the coin and like whatever happens, it's like often not personal. And if you have like a core set of values you're operating from, you can keep coming back to those values, and embrace that like you will make mistakes and you will mess up.
Well, I just had a comment really quick. I just wanted to say that just after listening, I think we all have some idea that our system currently is filled with a lot of these superficial sort of like punitive band-aid solutions, as you kind of touched on, instead of healing or skill building, like you mentioned. And I don't want to get too emotional or cliche here, but I think there's no humbler pursuit than helping people who need it most, marginalized people, and in a way that enacts long-term change, not only for current narratives, but for future narratives, and sort of breaking the cycle.
Thanks so much for sharing. Yeah, your comment made me think a quote that's really grounding in my own life is by Lilla Watson, who was a Australian. She worked with supporting Aboriginal people in Australia who had been really wronged by the government. And her quote was, "If you're here because your liberation is tied up in mine, then let's get to work. But if you're here to save me, then like we don't want to work together." And that's like a foundational, just like, I think any level of marginalization or oppression, like we're all interconnected. Like any one person's liberation is tied up in all of ours collectively. And so, yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Seth, once again, I always learn something when I hear you talk. It never fails. So thank you so much.
Thank you for all the support and for the work you do and for this class. And I'll email the slides and my contact information. So feel free to email me or call or text me if I can be helpful to you at any point in your journey. Just like admire the passions you all have and want to support you in any way.
Thank you so much, Seth. We'll certainly gather together any questions and encourage everybody to be in communication with you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great week.
You too. Bye. Thank you.
So perhaps we could take just a couple minutes for a little bit of immediate reflection. We'll certainly have some time in our class session tomorrow. And then what I think we'll do is we'll take a short break and come back and talk a little bit more about your narratives team project, which follows very nicely from what we were just thinking about. So any other thoughts you'd want to share at this point? Reactions, comments?
I think the other thing I would add. Go ahead, Ada.
Sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
thought it was really inspiring because like he's just this normal guy, but he's able to do like so much work, and I feel like that's something that's really daunting. Is like I have my passions and a lot of people in this class do, but it's like how do you tackle that? And just seeing an example is really helpful because like he's just so kind. He's from here. And it just like kind of gives you the courage to move forward with that and know that it's possible.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting that it kind of reiterated the point that it's really helpful to like listen to people about their struggles, and especially if you're in a position of greater privilege, instead of trying to like save them or come in with all these ideas that you want to take over, just to listen and then work from there.
One thing that I found really cool was the systems mapping and how it wasn't like really extensive. I mean, it was very extensive research, but it wasn't like a lot of like, I'm trying to figure out the right wording, but like heavy language or like terms. It was all from like community members that was kind of easy to follow, and you could trace it back to a story. And I thought that was really interesting versus like what I've learned in like other psych classes. I thought that was like really easy to follow and really informative kind of.
Yeah, we did something similar in Bonner. Everyone got together and contributed to make this kind of map that we use as a resource. And that was my first time I saw that kind of mapping, and it was interesting to see it on a larger scale, like Seth did. It was, I mean, you can see how beneficial it could be in every aspect.
I think another piece of that that's really worth emphasizing is how that puts people's lived experiences at the forefront, right? It comes in less from a vantage point of, oh, from academic research, we know this, and this is how it should be. It actually starts from it starts from privileging people's actual lived experience and saying, okay, what are things like for you? And that's what matters. And maybe we can connect that, hopefully, to some of the other pieces we know from theory or from research, but really privileging what people's experiences are like and their interpretations of them.
I also think it's interesting to reflect on how our country, I know we talked about this a fair amount, but how our country is sort of based off of punitive reactions and measures. And I think it's sort of embedded in our everyday lives. And I like he was saying, that's not normal, but I've normalized it in my mind. And I think a lot of people have. And so battling that, it's a hard job. And I just appreciate that he has such a passion for it.
Patricia, going off of that, I totally agree. And I was really interested in like how normalized it has become, like looking at jails and stuff, that's normalized punishment. So it's a very normal human thing, but it shouldn't be. And it's something we have the power to change. I really liked his theme of like, we each hold the power to change the narrative and dive deeper into it. So I really thought that was a really important theme that he brought up of like, we all hold that power, and we can all change that narrative and work forward to like better understand these things and how we can change them.
And that's potentially one of those kind of vicious cycles, right? So that narrative then reinforces kind of an interpretation of people as, needing punishment to change certain things, right? As opposed to thinking about the possibilities of what people can do and thinking of them as perhaps, even intrinsically good and with good intentions, and asking what could then have led certain actions to happen, right? It's not necessarily that somebody is a bad person who needs punishment to be restored in some way, right? Or even if that would even work. So definitely a lot of different ideas emerging, right? I think what we want to do is give you a little bit more time to reflect on that too, and we'll return to get some additional reflections tomorrow, and then in your weekly reflections. What we might do right now is take a short break, maybe about 5 minutes, to use the restroom, get a drink, regroup a little bit. And when you come back, we'll think together a little bit more about your narratives term project and actually getting started on that, with what we heard from Seth, as a foundation for us. Linda, would you like to add anything before we go to a short break?
I think the only other thing I might add is that, just to call out and think about this a bit, is Seth is presenting you a developmental point of view too. That early events impact later events and impact how someone is later. But all of our responses later are not based in a developmental theory. They're all based on responding to the behavior at the time. and not asking the question of how did someone come to be at that point, acting in that way. So just think about that a little bit more, and we'll touch on that tomorrow as well. But time for break.
Okay, so let's take about 5 minutes and we'll meet back and think about your explorations to come.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's see. Delaney, are you back as well and just not sharing video, or are you still away? Oops, there you are. Okay, no, I was just checking. I didn't want to start without you. Okay, well, so I think hopefully you have a sense now of what we'll try to do in various forms at the start of each of these Wednesday sessions, which is to offer you most weeks a new example, right? Similar to what we have started today. And then typically we will give you the remaining of our class time on Wednesdays to be together in your narratives project teams, right? Now, we still need to form those, right? So remember what we're thinking about for that narratives project. If you go to our course Brightspace site, there is information about how we're thinking about that project, right? But remember, in broad strokes, what we're thinking about is an opportunity for you to work collaboratively in a small group across the semester to explore what some of the dominant narratives are about rural Appalachia with regard to a particular topic. And the topic areas are pretty big, right? So there's room for all sorts of maneuvering and creativity in how you think about each one. And you're going to think a little bit about exploring what the common narratives are, but also thinking about what might some other narratives be, right? What might be some alternative narratives, either ones that you can either find some evidence of, or maybe ones that you can imagine, but you don't see representation of out there. And then we're going to think together about what some of the implications of all of that might be, right? So to get us started for today, one thing I want to draw your attention to is if you go to the course Brightspace site, all right, and then if you go to our collaborative workspace, so when you're on our Brightspace homepage, in the menu, there's an item that says collaborative space, right? If you click on that, you should now see in there, there's some project folders, right? But the main thing to notice is that there's an item there, a document called Narratives Project Evolving Guide. If you open that up, that's a place where over time we will continue to, sorry, my Google signed me out here. Over time, we are going to continue to post sort of landmarks, next steps, things to be thinking about in your project teams, right? And so what you should see there right now is some thoughts for what we hope we can start to address and you can start to address in your teams today, right? So one of the things will be to form those teams, and we'll come back to that in just a minute. But I thought maybe we would outline for you what we're thinking about immediate next steps to think about today and over the next week or so once you get into those project teams, right? So the first thing is to think about the scope and the different focus areas that there might be within a certain topic, right? So there are a lot of different things you could think about in the topic of health, or the topic of education, or the topic of politics, or the topic of environment. So one of the things we want to encourage you to do when you get into your teams today is to start thinking together about how do you want to think about the scope of what your team wants to look at in terms of narratives about the region, right? Do you want to focus on particular aspects of health or education or politics? Do you want to cast the net pretty broad? Are there certain focus areas you're really super interested in, right? So maybe within health, you're really interested in mental health. Maybe, there's other ways to think about focus areas. And we don't necessarily want you to have decided that by the end of class today, certainly, but we want you to start a discussion and start thinking about where you're all at, right? And one of the things you'll notice is there's a lot of room within each topic area for your own personal interests to come into play as well, right? And so as a team, you'll really pull together a pretty broad range of things potentially, right? So there's that, thinking about the scope and focus of the topic. Then there's also thinking a little bit about the sources of narratives, right? So not only are you going to have a certain topic area like health or education or politics, but you are then going to be seeking out, at least as an initial step of your process, some of the narratives that exist about rural Appalachia with regard to education, with regard to health, with regard to politics, right? So we also want you to start brainstorming today a little bit about what could some of those different sources of narratives be, and which ones might you want to draw from, right? So do you want to look at mainstream media? Do you want to look at various blogs? Do you want to look at songs? Do you want to look at literature? Do you want to look at photographs? Do you want to look at all of those? How is your group feeling about what sorts of sources or genres you might want to draw from in gathering narratives about the region, right? And so having thought about those things, right, to get started thinking about them, what we would then encourage you to do is to kind of have a plan for how your team might approach further exploration or thinking about both the scope and focus of your topic and also the kinds of sources and genres you might turn to, so that hopefully by sometime next week, right, you can maybe start to hone your thinking around each of those ideas, right? So you can figure out a plan for how, as a team and or individually, you're going to explore some of those possibilities over this next week, so that when we come together next week, you can say, okay, here's some things that I thought about in terms of scope or focus and in terms of genres, and then as a team, hopefully by the end of next week's session, you can maybe arrive at some initial decisions about those so that you can then move forward, right? Notice we're also asking that in your time together today, you talk a little bit about maybe some other days and times that are going to generally work for your team to get together, because you might want to do that at times other than or in addition to our Wednesday afternoons, right, as we go forward. So it might be nice to get those things on your schedule for the semester in terms of reserving some times for your team. And then we actually also want to make sure that you think together a little bit about how your team is going to prefer to communicate with each other, and also to make sure you have each other's relevant contact information so you can be in touch on a regular basis, all right? Those folders that you saw in the collaborative space, those are just repository folders for your team to use if they're helpful to you. You can keep whatever materials you want in those folders as you gather them, as you have project notes, whatever, if that's helpful to you. If your team decides you want to use a different way to gather your materials together, that's perfectly fine. But we created those in case those are helpful to you as a central kind of repository. Linda, would you like to add anything at this point?
No, except I think I would emphasize the phrase that we have in there: be creative and think big. Initially think like this expansively, and then you'll refine your idea. But this afternoon and going forward for the next few times, really try to be as expansive as you can. Even thinking about the question that Seth and Vichy started out, you know, their question was very expansive in the very beginning.
This is very much intended to be an evolving sort of process, right? So you are not expected to lock your team into something by next week and then it can't change at all, right?
No.
The whole point is that as you work on this together, you're going to discover new narratives and you're going to have new ideas and you're going to find another maybe pathway that you decide, oh wait, let's investigate that further because that seems really interesting, right? And we want to let that happen. But we also are going to give you these guiding steps to help you move forward. But realize it's less of a linear path. It's more of there might be cycles, right? Just as Seth was talking about.
Right.
So as you discover one thing, that may transform your project. And it's almost, expected that where you land sort of by the end of the semester is probably not going to be something you could completely envision right now, right? In fact, that's probably the hope, right? Is because you'll discover and learn some new things along the way. So definitely keep that kind of ethos in mind about what we're doing. So first of all, do you have any questions about what to try to do once you have project teams for today? Okay, so let me also say that once we finalize project teams, definitely feel free to be comfortable to decide how you all want to meet, right? So if you decide that, if you're all on campus and you decide, let's go over to the quad and sit there and do some talking, that's fine with us, right? I will, in general, on these Wednesday sessions, I will stay on the Zoom until the end of our class time in case you have questions for me as a group. In case your group wants to stay on Zoom, I can give you a breakout room and you can talk that way. But I will typically be here to field questions and so on. And I think as she's able to, Dr. Mays will do the same.
I'm glad to as well.
So keep that in mind also, but keep in mind you've got flexibility. All right. So what I'm going to share on my screen right now is an initial attempt to assign you to project groups. And let me just say before I share this, there are a couple of guiding principles we used here. We tried to put everybody in either their first or second choice topic from the questionnaire. I don't think anybody ended up in their number 3. So I think we stayed with 1 and 2 for everybody. We also tried to keep teams no bigger than 4 people. And so I'm going to post our initial assignments. But then I think Dr. Mays and I want to open it up and see if you want to do any shuffling, or just maybe you've changed your mind since you did the questionnaire or after hearing from Seth or whatever. We want you to be excited about the team that you're on. And so we'll allow for a few minutes of jostling around of who's on which teams and how to think about that, right? So let me share my screen really quickly with what we had so far. So here's our initial attempt at assignment to teams. And I think what we'll do is we'll just open it up for any conversation here in terms of people wanting to shuffle around a bit, if so.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think I was one of the ones who got their third choice. I'm happy where I am, but I would really I would like to be in health if possible, but I can stay here for
Oh,
sure.
okay. Okay. Thank you for pointing that out then, Ben. I had thought we had stayed with 1 and 2 for everybody. Okay, so you have a preference for being in health. Anyone else who would like to shift in any particular way? Feel free. I mean, we can redo.
We can easily reshuffle.
Yep. So make your thoughts known. Okay, everyone else is feeling happy with where they're at? Okay, so let's think about this for a minute. If we shift Ben to health, then we've got only, let's see.
We have a team of 2.
Yeah, we have a team of 2, which is fine. But let's hear then from Avery and Lamsey. Would you like to stay in politics as a team of 2 if we were to shift Ben over to health, or would you then prefer to think about something else? And either way is completely fine.
Yeah, either way is totally fine. I feel compelled to say that, yeah, go ahead.
I'm fine with it. I don't want to speak for Avery though.
No, I'm fine with it too. I kind of like small groups.
Sounds good.
Linda, were you going to add?
I was just going to say that this is of all the, well, I think politics about Appalachia is really incredibly compelling, but in the next couple of months, it will be really compelling.
I think that's right. And even if we look back to 2016, we saw how compelling it was then.
Well, I can give you, I don't want to derail us, and Karen has heard this story, but on the day after the election of 2016, this is going to be the example of a dominant narrative. A colleague of mine came up and said, "Your people elected him." I don't know what you mean. So what he meant was him was Trump, and my people were all of Appalachia. So he presented all of Appalachia as Trump-loving dominant bloc, which right there was a dominant narrative. And again, I'm not suggesting you pick that as your dominant narrative. I'm just saying that it will be playing out a lot over the next few weeks.
So I want to wait 1 more minute or so and make sure you have a chance to articulate anything else you might be interested in or want to shift around. And again, please speak up, because there were a lot of different factors we, in trying to do this, and we want to make sure you're in a place.
I think the other thing to say is that we're just in session 4 of the course, or I guess session 5, but you're going to be hearing about health and education and environment. You're going to be hearing about a lot of these things as we go through, and that will certainly shift how you are in your teams and thinking about your projects, but we want to be sure you're in a team that you're very, very excited about.
Go ahead.
I am happy to switch with Ben.
Oh, okay.
Would you like to do that? Because we can also have 4 in health and 2 in politics. So
I'd love to learn more about the political atmosphere. I'm excited to do that.
Okay. All right. So we'll switch Ben and Patricia there. Oops. Uh-oh, that's not what I meant to do. Let's see if I can get back there.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Would race relations be considered part of the political?
Yes.
Well, I think one of the things, so that's interesting, right? So one of the things you might realize is that something like race issues could be a component of any of these, right? So you can think about racial disparities when it comes to health. You can think about racial issues as they come up in education. You can think about them in relation to the environment and to politics, right? So that's part of also what we mean when we say, okay, think about the scope and possible foci here, because there are actually a lot, right? And there's also intersection across these four, right? So health is not unrelated to education, is not unrelated to the environment, is not unrelated to politics. So there's also ways in which the boundaries blur, and saying environment is your topic does not mean that it's going to be necessarily independent of political issues, for example, or education or health. So there's also that piece in which there's quite a bit of flexibility and creativity for your team.
And we would want you to think actually about the intersection across these. And we don't have a group for economics, but economics will play a part. You can think about them across all of these as well. So definitely race does cut across all.
So you might think about these as a starting point or an overarching framework for your team, given the interest you expressed, but then you can think about how you want to explore the potential intersections, right? And I think somebody had expressed an interest on their form in parenting, for example, and asked if there was a way to bring that in. And I think, there's relationships between parenting and health, and parenting and education, and parenting and politics and the environment, and so on. So there's definitely room for all of that, right?
Yeah, and so just for example, to fill that out, how does parenting and politics overlap? Well, you get into then the issues and the dialogue of who has, can the state, can institutions, can political institutions have impact on families and family decisions? Our child protective decisions, which are oftentimes part of the political system, how are they related to family health? So.
Okay, so I think here's what we'll do. And again, as we go forward, let us know how you're feeling about how all of this is working.
Please.
We really want to be adaptive to how things may shift over the course of the semester. So I think what we'll do then is we will give you time in your groups to start brainstorming a little bit about some of those issues, right? About what you think you really might want to look at in terms of narratives about the region with regard to this topic, and how you see it breaking down, and what sorts of genres or sources you might want to consider. And so again, Dr. Mays and/or I will stay on the Zoom till the end of our class session, but please think together about where you would like to be to do a little bit more conversation. I can certainly put you into breakout rooms based on your project teams right now. And I think what I'll do is go ahead and do that, and then you can talk in your team in your breakout room and see if you're going to change locations or keep going in your breakout room and so on. And then just send us a message if you need one of us to drop into your breakout room for some thoughts or feedback and so on. And then what we'll plan to do is see you again in class tomorrow, with the hope that you can make some progress thinking about some of this in the rest of the time that we have today. Linda, would you like to add anything?
I don't think so, but please do, even in between class today and tomorrow, if questions come up, please send them to us.
Yes, just let us know. And I guess one more thing before I make the breakout rooms is just to foreshadow tomorrow's class session. We'll have some time to integrate across the week. We've asked you to look at chapter 8 of Belonging from Bell Hooks. So we'll have a little bit more of her perspective on a slightly different set of issues. So we're skipping around a little bit. Take a look at chapter 8 there. And we'll have some time to see how things played out in your project teams as well, all right? So it's going to take me a minute here because I need to kind of manually assign people to these rooms. Let me go back for a minute.
And while Professor Yu is doing that, as she said earlier, as we both said earlier, she and I will work on a project as well, so that we can be following the steps along with you.
Yes, let's see. Why is my, sorry, I'm going to stop. Let's see. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute.
Do you need any help? I'm not sure I can help you because
I think I'm okay. My Zoom just wasn't showing me.
I think only one person can do the breakout rooms.
Let's see. Somehow it's not treating me as the host right now. Let me see if I can.
Interesting.
See what.
Well, I'm a co-host. Can I do?
Well, it says I'm the host. Let me try again. I'm not sure what happened with the breakout rooms here. All right, let's see if I can do this. So we've got Ben, Anna, and Delaney. Susan, let's see, Mary, son. Okay, I think I've got it. If somehow you end up in the wrong room, send me a message. I think I got it correct though. Here we go.